The day I confirmed my wife was cheating, I agreed to sleep in separate rooms. 3 months later, after gathering more than enough evidence to bury any excuse she could come up with, I finally walked back into her room. The moment I stepped inside, Lois snatched up her phone, turned the screen dark, and rolled over with her back facing me. "I'm tired," she muttered coldly. "I'm going to sleep." The room smelled faintly of lavender and perfume, scents that used to calm me after exhausting days at work. Now, they only made my chest tighten. There was another scent too, subtle but unfamiliar, lingering on the sheets like a ghost that didn't belong in our marriage. I sat slowly on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping beneath my weight. "We need to talk." A frustrated sigh escaped her. "There's nothing to talk about. This is about that again, isn't it?" She yanked the blanket higher over her shoulder. "I already told you if you need it so badly, go find someone else outside. I'm just not in the mood." Her impatient tone washed over me like ice water. For years, I had tolerated everything: her distance, her temper, her endless excuses. I convinced myself marriage had rough patches. I convinced myself love meant endurance. Now, sitting in that dim room, I realized how pathetic I'd become. I kept my voice calm. "If I go find someone else, then what's the point of you being here?" I asked quietly. "Are you helping with the bills? Supporting me emotionally? I handle every single thing in this house, every payment, every responsibility. If I'm supposed to seek comfort somewhere else too, then tell me, Lois, what exactly do I still need you for?" She spun around instantly, eyes blazing. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" I looked straight at her. "It means I want a divorce." The silence that followed was deafening. Then she shot upright in bed, staring at me as if I'd slapped her. "Logan Dickerson, are you insane?" she snapped. "Just because I won't sleep with you, you want a divorce? You say I don't share financial pressure, don't give emotional support? Then who gave birth to your child? Did he fall from the sky?" I stared at her for several long seconds before speaking. Shouldn't pregnancy and childbirth involve the biological father? My voice was dangerously calm. "Am I?" The color drained from her face. For the first time in months, Lois had no immediate answer. Then came the explosion. "Logan Dickerson, you bastard." She grabbed a pillow and hurled it at me with trembling hands. "You're accusing me of cheating? You're insulting my character." I caught the pillow before it hit the floor and tossed it aside. "Lois, we're adults. Actions have consequences." My eyes never left hers. "Do you really think I'd accuse you without evidence? Do you think I'd humiliate myself like this for fun?" Her breathing became uneven.
"Fine," she snapped.
"Then show me the evidence." Without another word, I pulled the folded document from my pocket and tossed it onto the bed. The paternity test landed in front of her like a death sentence. "Open your eyes and read it." Her hands shook as she turned on the bedside lamp. The warm yellow light illuminated her pale expression while her eyes raced across the page. For a moment, the room became completely silent except for the faint humming of the air conditioner. Then she looked up at me in disbelief. "You went behind my back and did a paternity test on the child?" Her voice cracked. "You don't trust me at all?" I gave a humorless laugh. "Go splash some water on your face and calm down before talking to me again," I said coldly. "Because nothing you just said qualifies as rational." Tears welled in her eyes instantly. "So that's it," she whispered bitterly. "You don't trust me anymore?" "You're right," I replied. "There's no point staying married." The next 10 minutes were chaos. Closet doors slammed open. Drawers were yanked out violently. Lois stuffed clothes into a suitcase while crying and cursing under her breath. She wanted me to stop her, to soften, to apologize like I always did after every fight. But I just sat there quietly watching. Eventually, she dragged her suitcase to the front door. Before leaving, she turned back toward me, waiting for something, regret, pleading, anything. I gave her nothing. The door slammed hard enough to shake the walls. In the past, whenever we fought, she'd storm out dramatically. Sometimes she'd disappear for a day, sometimes 3. She would block my number and ignore every message until I panicked enough to beg her to come home. For 7 years, I walked on eggshells to preserve this family. I swallowed my pride during arguments, suppressed my anger, even restrained my own needs just to avoid upsetting her. But that night, the second she walked out the door, I calmly picked up my phone and blocked every way she could contact me. This time, I wasn't chasing after her. Not anymore. I leaned back on the couch and stared at the dark ceiling for a long time, exhaustion settling deep into my bones. Then I glanced toward the child's bedroom. My chest tightened painfully. The boy was innocent. None of this was his fault. But the moment I learned the truth, every time I looked at him, all I could see was betrayal. I hated myself for it. Still, I knew I couldn't continue pretending. I couldn't spend the rest of my life raising another man's child while living inside a lie. Near midnight, I gently woke him up. "Dad," he mumbled sleepily, rubbing his eyes. I forced a smile onto my face. "We're going to Grandma's for a sleepover, buddy." Half asleep, he nodded and reached for my hand. The entire drive was silent except for the soft sound of rain tapping against the windshield. When we arrived, my mother-in-law opened the door wearing a robe, clearly startled. "Logan," she frowned. "The boy has school tomorrow. Why are you bringing him here this late?" I said nothing. I simply handed her a copy of the paternity test results. Her confused expression slowly turned into horror. Without another word, I turned around and walked back to the car. That night, the Walker family was destined for chaos. The next morning, I woke up expecting silence. Instead, I smelled breakfast. Real breakfast. Not takeout. Not frozen food. I walked downstairs and froze. Lois stood in the kitchen wearing an apron, her hair tied loosely behind her head. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the steam rising from the dishes she'd prepared. There were eggs, fresh porridge, toast, fruit, even coffee prepared exactly the way I liked it. 7 years of marriage. It was the first time I'd ever seen her cook for me, which only made it hurt more, because clearly she knew how. The question was, who had she been cooking for all this time? She sat at the dining table quietly waiting for me, eyes red from crying. But I never sat down. After washing my face, I walked over calmly and placed the divorce papers in front of her. The sound of the documents hitting the table seemed unnaturally loud. Her fingers immediately grabbed my wrist. "Honey," her voice trembled softly. "Aren't you going to ask where I was last night?" I looked down at her hand gripping mine. "I only care where the woman I love goes," I said flatly. "You're not her." Her tears fell instantly. In the past, seeing her cry would have shattered me. I would have hugged her, apologized first, convinced myself everything could still be fixed. Now I felt absolutely nothing. She lowered her head and cried quietly. "Do we really have to divorce?" "Yes." Her shoulders trembled harder. "I went to my mom's place last night," she whispered. "When I got home late, my dad already suspected something was wrong. His health is bad, Logan. If he finds out we're divorcing, he won't be able to handle it." I stared at her expressionlessly. "How is that my problem?" She looked up at me in disbelief. "How can you be this cold-blooded?" I almost laughed. Even now, she was still acting, still trying to shift guilt onto me. I cut through her lies mercilessly. "Didn't you notice the child isn't home?" Her expression froze. "I took him to your mother's house last night." I watched the panic slowly spread across her face. "You didn't see him there?" For the first time, she looked genuinely shaken. Her lips trembled. "I didn't go home." There it was. The truth she accidentally exposed. But even then, she tried to recover quickly. "I just didn't know how to explain things to my family," she said hurriedly. "My dad's condition is real. That's why I didn't dare go home in the middle of the night." Then, unbelievably, she added in a reproachful tone, "You know his health is bad. How could you drop the child off there so late?" I looked at her for a long moment, disappointment settling deeper into my chest. "Think carefully before you speak, Lois." My voice was colder than she'd ever heard before. "You're the one who cheated." I leaned slightly closer. "Your affair is the reason I brought the child there in the first place." Every word landed heavily between us. "You're the one who caused your father stress." Did you honestly think your father would have been perfectly fine with you sleeping around behind your husband's back? Her eyes reddened instantly. "I didn't cheat." Lois's tears fell even harder. "You can't accuse me of something I didn't do," she choked out between sobs. "I never cheated on you." I looked at her quietly, almost numb by that point. Whether she admitted it or not no longer mattered. The truth had already carved itself into my bones. "You know better than anyone whether this is a false accusation," I said coldly. "I'm giving you 3 days. If you refuse a mutual divorce, I'll file a lawsuit myself." I pushed the papers closer to her. "And pack your things today. Get out of my house." Her face turned pale. The sight of her trembling shoulders used to make me soften instantly. 7 years of marriage had trained me to comfort her before I even processed my own anger. But now, just looking at her made something inside me revolt. "The sight of you makes me sick." I turned and walked out without another glance, ignoring the sound of her crying behind me. I had far more important things to deal with today, like the man who had been sleeping with my wife. Owen Black, master's degree overseas, planning director at Starfall Media Group, industry golden boy. Young, polished, successful. The type of man business magazines loved to put on their covers. And today, I was going to pay him a personal visit. Neither of those cheating bastards was walking away untouched. By the time I arrived at Starfall Media Group, the morning rush was in full swing. Employees in expensive suits moved briskly through the gleaming lobby carrying coffee and tablets, pretending to be busier than they probably were. The receptionist greeted me politely. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" I slipped my business card onto the counter. "Tell Owen Black Logan Dickerson is here." The moment she saw my name, her expression changed slightly. Everyone in this industry knew who I was. Within less than a minute, her phone rang. She glanced at me nervously before standing. "Director Black says you can go up immediately." Of course he did. Inside the elevator, I watched the numbers climb one by one, my reflection staring back at me from the mirrored walls. Strangely enough, I felt calm. No rage. No impulsiveness. Just clarity. The clearer my mind became, the more terrifying I probably looked. When I entered Owen Black's office, he stood up immediately with a bright professional smile plastered across his face. The office itself was extravagant without being tacky. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. A faint scent of expensive cologne lingered in the air. Awards and certificates decorated the shelves behind him like trophies. "Director Dickerson." Owen walked around the desk and extended his hand warmly. What an honor. I ignored the hand completely. His smile stiffened for half a second. I sat down casually across from him and crossed one leg over the other. "Do I need to introduce myself?" I asked flatly. Owen chuckled awkwardly and withdrew his hand. "Anyone who doesn't know Luminous Culture Group's legendary operations director doesn't deserve to stay in this industry." The flattery rolled off his tongue smoothly. Clearly, he was experienced at reading people. Unfortunately for him, I wasn't there to network. "I assume you're here to discuss some kind of partnership," he continued carefully. I stared at him. "Can't you guess why I'm really here?" A flicker crossed his eyes. It vanished quickly, but I still caught it. Then he leaned back slowly in his chair and gave a helpless little laugh. A man of Director Dickerson's status certainly doesn't lack female attention. His tone turned meaningful. "Is this really necessary?" I looked at him expressionlessly. "Then let me sleep with your wife too." The atmosphere in the room instantly froze. Owen's smile disappeared. His eyes darkened slightly as he leaned back further into his chair. "Going after a married woman is immoral," he admitted lightly. "I'll own that." Then he narrowed his eyes at me. "But immoral doesn't mean illegal." The arrogance in his voice was impossible to miss. "Director Dickerson's professional abilities are famous in this industry," he said while raising a thumb. "At work, you're this." Then he slowly flipped his thumb downward into a mocking pinky gesture. "But as a husband?" His lips curled faintly. "You're this." My expression never changed. That seemed to disappoint him slightly. He continued testing me anyway. "Lois learned quite a few tricks from me," he said lazily. "Did she never use them on you?" His smile widened. "I bet you really want to hit me right now." He tapped the desk lightly. "Unfortunately, sleeping with your wife isn't a crime. Assault is." The mocking amusement in his eyes was more irritating than shouting would have been. Most men would have exploded by then. Maybe that was what he wanted. Maybe he thought if he provoked me enough, I'd lose control and hand him the advantage. Too bad for him. I calmly reached into my briefcase and pulled out a black flash drive. Then I slid it across the desk toward him. "Take a look." His brows furrowed slightly. "I'm confident," I said evenly. "You'll find a different tone to speak to me in afterward." I never walked into a fight unprepared. Especially not against people like Owen Black. The first time I met him had been 3 months earlier at a business summit. The second I saw his face, something felt wrong. At first, I couldn't explain it. Then it hit me. He looked strangely similar to my son. Not identical, but the resemblance was enough to make my blood run cold. The more I looked at him that night, the stronger the resemblance became. Afterward, I quietly arranged a paternity test. When the results came back, it felt like someone had taken a knife to my chest. The child I'd raised for years wasn't mine. From that moment onward, I began investigating everything. And Owen Black turned out to be even filthier than I expected. He and Lois had been high school classmates. After graduation, he'd gone overseas to study before returning to the country a few years later. Eventually, he married into the powerful Hargrove family. Vivian Hargrove, sole heiress of Starfall Media Group, was his wife. Or more accurately, his financial lifeline. A live-in son-in-law living off his wife's family name. But Lois wasn't his only affair. Not even close. The flash drive contained everything. Hotel footage, photos, private recordings. Some clips were captured so clearly that every expression on Owen's face could be seen in perfect detail. As the videos played across his office computer, the color slowly drained from his face. The smugness vanished completely. By the end, his hands were visibly trembling. I leaned back calmly. If Miss Hargrove saw these videos, I asked quietly, what do you think her reaction would be? Owen immediately grabbed a tissue and wiped sweat from his forehead. Logan, listen to me. Gone was the earlier arrogance. Now he sounded genuinely panicked. It takes two people to cheat, he said hurriedly. I'm trash, fine, I admit that. But Lois isn't innocent either. She approached me first. I said nothing. We're both men here, he continued nervously. You know how hard it is to refuse when a woman throws herself at you. I stared at him for several seconds before finally speaking. Since we're both men, I said quietly, then you should understand exactly how it feels to be betrayed by your spouse. His expression instantly darkened. Of course he understood. Because despite marrying into wealth, Owen Black held no real power in his own marriage. Vivian Hargrove was notorious in certain circles. Beautiful, ruthless, untouchable. And she kept plenty of men around herself. Maybe they had some silent agreement to look the other way. Maybe Owen endured it because he needed the Hargrove family's power. But now, that balance had shattered. All it would take was one leaked video. Vivian Hargrove would become the laughingstock of every elite circle in the city. And someone as prideful as her would never tolerate that humiliation quietly. Owen clearly understood the consequences. His voice lowered immediately. Logan, name your terms. The panic in his eyes became more obvious. As long as it's within my ability, I'll make it right. I glanced at my empty teacup casually. Without hesitation, he hurried to refill it himself. The same man who had mocked me minutes ago now looked like a servant trying desperately to survive. I almost found it funny. I've read a lot of those billionaire CEO novels lately, I said lightly while watching him pour tea, with shaking hands. I'm not some billionaire chairman, but I figured I'd experience what it feels like to have someone kneel in front of me for once. Owen's jaw tightened hard. Humiliation flashed across his face. But after several long seconds, he slowly lowered himself onto both knees. The expensive suit pants wrinkled against the floor. For the first time since entering the office, I finally smiled. Smack. My palm struck the left side of his face. Smack. Then the right. Again. And again. Each slap echoed sharply through the luxurious office. Owen's cheeks quickly turned red and swollen, but he endured it silently. After the final slap, I leaned slightly forward. Director Black, I asked calmly, am I breaking the law by hitting you? Owen forced an ugly smile onto his face despite the humiliation burning in his eyes. If anyone else did it, he said hoarsely, that would be assault. Then he lowered his head slightly. But if it's you, Logan? His voice became bitter. It just means you think I'm worth the trouble. Smooth talker indeed. That answer earns you a few more. Smack. My hand struck Owen across the face again. Then again. He didn't dare dodge. Didn't dare resist. The earlier arrogance in his eyes had completely disappeared. All that remained was humiliation and fear buried beneath forced obedience. I looked down at him calmly. Now, let's talk business. Reaching into my briefcase, I pulled out a stack of printed bank records and tossed them onto the desk in front of him. The paper scattered across the polished wood surface. Over the years, Lois transferred a total of $106,000 to you. I tapped the documents lightly. Sound about right? Owen's expression darkened further. That's right. I leaned back lazily. I'm not interested in squeezing you for interest. Let's round it up to $120,000. I stared at him. Any problem with that? No problem, he answered immediately. Not even a second of hesitation. None at all. The desperation in his voice almost made me laugh. I picked up my teacup slowly. How long until the money hits my account? 3 days, he said quickly. Maximum 3 days. I smiled faintly. Good boy. The moment the words left my mouth, humiliation flashed across his face again. Before he could react, I slapped him twice more across the cheeks, sharp enough to leave clear red marks behind. Only then did I finally stand up. My anger had mostly faded already. People like Owen weren't worth destroying my own sanity over. As I walked toward the office door, his strained voice suddenly came from behind me. Logan, what about the videos? I paused briefly before glancing back at him over my shoulder. That depends entirely on how well you behave from now on. His jaw tightened hard, but in the end, he could only kneel there helplessly and watch me leave. The moment I stepped outside the building, the cold wind hit